Hi, I'm Joseph Cox from Stories That Celebrate. And what I do is I write stories that celebrate. In the final chapter of my mom's magnum opus, she compared Michelangelo, who everybody knows, the great art, the Sistine Chapel, all this tremendous work that he did in sculpture and painting. She compares him to the greengrocer who sold him his apples, right? And she says, look, we can all see the impact of Michelangelo, but it's quite possible that through the love he showed his family, through the interactions he had with those around him, the greengrocer actually had a bigger impact on our world than Michelangelo himself. We sometimes forget that and forget the impact that regular, everyday, ordinary people can have, the extraordinary impact they can have on the world. So what I do is I take the ordinary, the normal, the routine, and I interview ordinary people and I create extraordinary stories that celebrate their virtues and what they add to the world. I love what I do. What I do uplifts people. It creates new understandings. It makes people more aware of who they are and who they can be. And my entire goal in writing these stories is to uplift, to strengthen relationships, and to make things better. When it comes to getting a Stories That Celebrate done, though, some people are reluctant. Some people don't want to sit down and have a chat with me. They're a little bit nervous that the process will be something that's too revealing or assails their modesty, or they have some other sort of fear about undergoing the process. So I wanted to explain what the process is to try and make it something that hopefully will be a little less, well, challenging for you, the possible client. So what do I do? Well, the central part of the process, as far as you're concerned, is the chat. I sit down and I talk with the people I'm going to be writing about. I talk with them one-on-one because whenever you put people in a group setting, they end up constantly compensating and correcting and self-editing for the person who's with them. And they'll say things that are more revealing, but I don't mean revealing in a bad sense, sometimes more uplifting. The praise you'll give somebody else when you're not sitting next to them can sometimes be far more effusive than what you give, and far more direct and pointed and analytical than what you give when they're sitting next to you. So I interview people one-on-one, and the interviews all follow the same basic format, although every single one is, of course, very different because people are different and things go in different directions. The interviews start with privacy. Nothing in the interview is shared with anybody else, including the other people being interviewed. Nothing. I don't share the interviews. They're entirely for my own purposes and for my own analysis. The only product of the interviews that's shared is the stories. So I take the stories and I will share them before I share them with you even. I'll share them with my wife. She's an important part of my team in that she reads what I write and she tells me this is part of her virtues. She doesn't suffer nonsense. She tells me if the stories suck. And if they aren't any good, then I go back and I write another one before you even see what I did. And so I had a recent wedding where I wrote 4 stories. Right? The first 2 weren't very good. The third one was excellent, but it was a little bit too dark for a wedding. And the fourth one finally hit the sweet spot. So I write the stories, and then I'll present them to you, and you can yay or nay whether or not they actually are used at your celebration and whether or not you want them to be available more broadly. I've even written stories in celebration of those who've passed away where I haven't even mentioned the names of the people who've passed away, but I've still brought out their characteristics so that those characteristics can be celebrated by people who read the story without even knowing who they're about for reasons of that privacy. Okay, so privacy is number one. The second thing I talk about is that, well, I'll ask some questions inevitably. I don't know what they're going to be because I have a basic format, but the details aren't known yet. I ask some questions about that people won't have answers to, right? There's ambiguity. There's a lack of understanding. There's a situation where people say, you know what, I just haven't thought about that before. That's perfectly normal. I like to ask those questions because the thought process people have when they're thinking about how to answer it, when they're thinking about how to flesh out their understanding of the question, can be in and of itself extremely revealing and extremely positive. So what questions do I ask? Then we begin the bulk of the interview. The first thing is I start with you. What's your history? Some basic background, hobbies. What do you enjoy? That kind of basic stuff going on. And then I ask the critical question that forms the baseline of these interviews. It's a bit of a hard one, a bit of a difficult to deal with. If you were to die tomorrow, what would you want your legacy to be? I'm not talking about people remembering you. I'm talking about the actions and the virtues and the ideals that you had rippling through the people who knew you, those who didn't know you, those who are told about you. What would you want those virtues to be? There's a variety of answers people have, right? They could be duty, love, always make cookies for the family, whatever it happens to be. There's different sorts of answers. But those answers are extremely useful in understanding what your real world impact should be, what you think your real world impact should be, what that Michelangelo's greengrocer should have been, right? If he was the ideal who would outdo Michelangelo himself. I then extend that question to your spouse. Tell me about your spouse a little bit, but really tell me, what do you think your spouse's values are? What do you think their desired legacy is? And oftentimes I find the answers are different between what somebody says about their spouse and what their spouse says about themselves. And the differences can be beautiful because oftentimes people have a clearer understanding of other people than they have even of themselves. I extend it even further. Okay, now what community do you expect to belong to? Right? Are you gamers? Do you belong to a religious community? There's going to be multiple communities that you're a part of. I want to learn about where you see yourselves as a couple in those communities, and then ultimately, what do you think your marriage, your bringing together of those two people unlocks? This is the place where I get the most. I hadn't thought about that kind of response. But what does your marriage enable? What are the two of you able to do that wasn't possible for one of you? Because, of course, we live in a world in which there's limits to what an individual can do. In order to achieve great things, we have to work with other people. Well, marriage is working with other people. And if a marriage can understand what it brings to the table, what its legacy as a combined unit ought to be, then it can be far more impactful, far more directed, and people end up being on the same page with this grand strategic vision being shared. Now, I often get no answer for that, and that's perfectly fine. I don't need to have an answer. I can work with the individual qualities of the people involved and create a story that celebrates one possible outcome. All right, that's perfectly fine. That's basically it of the interviews, right? We talk about those things. It takes between half an hour and an hour for each person. And then I go off and I think. It takes generally a few weeks, and I write stories. And I present the stories to you, as I mentioned before. And when we hit one that we like, one that works for you, then we go ahead and I do the artwork and the packaging, and it becomes something that's ready for your celebration. The whole point of this process is to strengthen relationships, right? There's this idea that you have a you have a relationship and you have expectations that are formed by people around you, and those expectations become reality. And when you can share the qualities of a relationship, I mean, the most common story I do is I take the values of each of the people in the marriage and I put them together into a single character and show what that character can do, often in extraordinary circumstances, but nonetheless, show what that character can do and how beautiful those values are together. I can end up providing something that strengthens the sense of that relationship in the community for the people getting married themselves, but for their families and for their friends and for this new community that's being created by bringing together both sides of the relationship, the different guests who are invited to the wedding. So I love doing this. I find it uplifts people, it uplifts relationships. It's an absolutely dream thing, a dream career for me to be pursuing, and I'd love to write you a story. So if you'd like to learn more, look me up at storiesthatcelebrate.com. I have a contact form there. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to write you a story. Thank you for watching.